Okay, I'm sitting down with Tony Scardino, aka Professor Pizza, and Megumi Robinson, the Vice President of Services for Bell Communication. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, guys, we're going to talk about content in the restaurant industry, which is clearly near and dear to me, as this is where I spend a lot of my time and attention creating content for the restaurant industry. But you both bring very unique perspectives to this game. Tony, you as an operator who are leveraging social media content to connect with audiences. And then Megumi, you guys at Bell obviously been great partners for us in being able to understand the state of influencer marketing and how food service companies can really tap into that audience. So I guess just to set the stage, Tony, let's start with you. I want to know a little bit more about you, Tony, how you came to be Professor Pizza. You started though as somebody who just loved food and got into pizza specifically, right? Tell me your story.
Yeah, that's right. So I grew up with an Italian-American family, Italian-American household that always used food as kind of an arbiter of community and bringing people together. We were always known for having great household get-togethers and a great spread of food at them. And so that idea of hospitality was always instilled in me from a very early age. My father worked in catering and my grandparents' restaurants from a very early age. So I grew up even up until maybe the age of 5 or 6, seeing him still going off to catering jobs and my uncle even much longer than that, who's the father of my cousin who is is part of our family business that is Professor Pizza, who oversees all the social media for our business actually. But he had a hot dog stand, he had catering operations for many years past my 6th birthday, and as time went on I got a chance to hang out and help within them. But I think pizza is just kind of one of those things that unifies and connects so many different people. So many people have a emotional attachment to it. I had my own from growing up and just having it for special occasions or birthday parties or after Little League games, whatever the case might have been. And taking some of those early memories for pizza and putting some technique behind them, which I was eventually able to do in San Francisco with the help of 13-time world pizza champion Tony Gemignani. I went on to become a member of that team myself, and now I get a chance to compete with those members and represent the team both on a global basis and just leverage whatever resources, knowledge I might have towards the benefit of the team. And then certainly the team members do that for myself and for the other team members as well. So pizza's been a lifelong journey that I'm still very much on.
Yeah. And to take that a step further, then you open a restaurant in Chicago. I mean, up through until this point, content was not necessarily anything that you're thinking a lot about, right? Had you thought much about how you could leverage content before you opened the restaurant?
So I'm 34, I'll be 35 in September. I think my entire adult life, it's been clear that no matter what I got into, social media was going to play a part in it. I think it's easy to hyper focus because that's what we do on the restaurant business, but it seems like doing just about anything entrepreneurial these days is an uphill battle. So, whatever you can do to separate yourself from the pack, you're going to want to take advantage of. And having an engaging social media presence that people want to keep up with, to me, has always been one of those tools that I could use to get my name out there a little bit more. So I wouldn't say I knew from the beginning that it was going to be so central to my job, but I knew it was going to play a role. And sure enough, as time's gone on, it's played more and more of a role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so Megumi, going over to you, and again, sort of
Yeah.
building foundation here. I want to just stop and explore the nature of social media content today, as we call it, influencer marketing. If you step back and look over the last 5 to 7 years, and we went from this position of social media is just where everybody goes to goof off to, oh, now we have a bunch of people building significant audiences, offering a look into their lives, to, oh, they have really built some infrastructure and turned this into a business, and now we call them influencers.
Mhm.
Now here we are where it is these influencers are very beneficial to companies and perhaps no other industry beyond restaurants, because food obviously resonates so well on a visual medium such as Instagram and TikTok. So I guess just to first start with Bell Communication, what work are you guys doing with influencers, and why have you really kind of homed in on that audience as being important to your work?
Yeah, so at Bell, we are a creative strategy and PR firm that specializes in food service. And specifically, we work with everyone from restaurant franchises to ingredient suppliers and CPG innovators. And we are focused on helping these brands and these restaurants think not just for the now, but for the next. And so it is anticipating, where are consumers going to be spending time? Where are they going to make decisions? Where are they being influenced? And you alluded to this, Sam, the industry has evolved so much. When we started working with influencers nearly 15 years ago, at the time, they were primarily mostly known as mommy bloggers. And now we've really seen that evolve to where they have really significant business impact when we are able to put together the right types of partnerships. I would say anymore, social media, and even to an extent, because influencers are a part of that social media ecosystem, it is not a nice to have. It is a must have for visibility and for driving foot traffic. And so it's an area that we work very closely with our clients to help them identify the right partnerships that are authentic extensions of their brand. It comes back to, again, understanding also, who is your customer? Where are they spending time? What is the type of information or content that they are seeking? And building then a presence that then that kind of achieves all of those things. It's really meeting the consumer, where they're at and the way that they like to receive information. And what we're seeing is they're getting a lot of this info on social media. That's where they're spending a lot of time. It's where they're being influenced.
Yeah. So I want to talk then about this idea of discoverability, because, obviously for Tony in Chicago, people might just Google pizza near me and be able to find, a pizza shop in Chicago. But this idea that, again, TikTok and Instagram become so key to discoverability. Megumi, in your guys' research and what you have seen with your partners, your influencer partners, how does that discoverability happen on these social channels? What is key to getting the attention of a potential customer and then bringing them into a restaurant?
So if I can start first, I always think it's helpful to lay a foundation with some data. And this is actually some data that I know we worked with your team on to survey Gen Z and millennials to find out how are they finding new restaurants? How are they learning about new food trends? And through this data, what we found is that 73% of Gen Z and millennial consumers have visited a restaurant in the last 3 months because of a social media review. So I think that's really important to know. That is where they are going. And even more so, 55% of these consumers say that social media reviews are the top reason that they would try a restaurant. They're going to social media first for these recommendations, to even beating out Google and Yelp. And so that is really significant. And when we think about then, okay, how do restaurants then make sure that they are showing up on these social platforms in the right way? There are some strategies that are really important to keep in mind. So there is a term called social SEO. I think a lot of people might be more familiar with the term SEO when it comes to optimizing your website to show up in Google search. Well, what we're seeing is that social SEO, which means optimizing your social media content for showing up on Instagram, on TikTok, we want to place the same type of emphasis and thought into that as you would for your website too. And so there are different things that restaurants should consider when they are posting their content. You want to think about the content and be really strategic in thinking about, what are the questions that consumers might be asking? So using your example, Sam, like, where can I find great pizza in Chicago? Where can I find great pizza in general? What are the types of questions that people are going to be asking, and ensuring that as you are creating your content, you are thinking about those keywords and phrases in the captions, in the voiceovers, even down to like the thumbnail images and the alt text within the content that you are posting. You want to use relevant hashtags. Hashtags, I think, are making a comeback. For a while, they were all the rage. Then it was like, wait, are these relevant or not? And now they're becoming incredibly relevant again. I think another important thing too is you want to balance having content that is jumping onto trends at the same time, also first and foremost thinking about what is actually going to be most useful. So prioritize usefulness over just jumping on the hottest trend right now.
Sure. All right. So, Tony, going back to you, tell me about your entry into content. What was the aha moment, Tony, that you discovered that social platforms would be this great platform for you and for Professor Pizza?
I think sometimes we stumble into something and you start to take it more serious over time as it begins to find traction. And for me, that was the case. At the time when I started using the Professor Pizza moniker, I didn't even have a place of my own yet. I was still working at Paulie G's Logan Square and helping out their pizza team. And I had an opportunity just through chatting up a guest to meet with a colleague of his who was a professor at DePaul University and speak as kind of like a guest lecturer, guest professor at one of his classes. And I had a chance to do that a variety of different times. And this was during the first wave, Magooby, of hashtags.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for just a way to commemorate this unique moment of speaking in front of this college class. I didn't even graduate college myself, so the idea that I was speaking in front of one about something positive and not even a cautionary tale was something that had me a little bit beside myself. So I took a photo, kind of a selfie at the end of it with the whole class and hashtagged it Professor Pizza just because I liked the alliterative nature of how that sounded. And I had an uncle reach out to me saying, "Oh, I love that name. You got to really run with that." I wasn't totally sure that I wanted to at the time. I was kind of more concerned with taking myself too seriously. And took a step back and realized, it's pizza that I'm passionate about, and pizza is inherently something that should be fun and shouldn't be taken too seriously. And so I embraced the Professor Pizza name, and this became the username for what would be my Instagram account, which is certainly my entry point into the social media sphere. And it became this landing place for everything that was going on in my career and at that time in my life. When I started the account, it was equal parts like personal account and business account. Since then, I have separated the two entities, and I think it's important to do so as time goes on and as you're trying to polish up your content that much more. But I think it's almost beneficial to have them merged into one from the beginning, because I think in the beginning, everybody's scenario is going to be a little bit different. But for me, yes, my content is pizza, but in many respects, it is my pizza journey and selling me as a pizza maker, as a pizza entrepreneur, as a pizzeria owner. And in the beginning stages of having my own Instagram account or social media presence, people were still getting to know me, right? So I was using this as an opportunity to introduce myself, introduce my passion for pizza, and introduce my journey. And I think one thing that always trips people up, especially early on when they're creating content, is that old adage of paralysis by perfection. And the thought behind that is that everything that I post has to be this super polished content that you would expect to come out of a Fortune 500 company because, I got to fake it until I make it. And certainly you have to fake it till you make it, but I think if you have that idea from the outset that everything you hit post has to be super polished and curated, can prevent you from being spontaneous, of the moment. I struggle with that to this day. I think I've gotten a lot better about it. But every time I just click record on Instagram Live in the kitchen when I'm about to do something, regardless of the volume in the kitchen, the lighting in the kitchen, did I bring my gimbal that day? Did I bring my mics? Or am I just propping up my phone against a stack of towels? Like, honestly, people aren't super concerned with the production value most of the time, so long as you have enough of an internet connection for people to engage with you.
Mhm.
They're actually more impressed by the fact that you're doing anything in front of them. They're thrilled that they get to engage in the process, maybe ask some questions along the way, and kind of peek behind the curtain and see what you're up to. So obviously some of those examples are specific to, Instagram or TikTok or even YouTube lives, but they should all be interpreted the same way, whether it's a live or something you decide to post in that moment to your hard feed or to your story. People are far more, in my opinion, focused on the journey than they are the end product. And once you have an end product, people are going to be far more likely to support you if they were there along for the journey in the first place. And for me, like, if I'm going to give any piece of advice in this world, it's not going to be as scientific as anything the movie's able to offer or anything as analytical, but it's just that feeling that if you have an opportunity to get your journey out there before you have any bills or responsibilities attached to your journey, you're going to be far better off once you do have those bills and responsibilities attached to your journey, because you're going to have spent that time creating an organic audience before there was any absolute steadfast necessity to do so. So I started creating that audience from the very beginning before I knew that it was going to be a big driver of our business. And as soon as the business and the bills and the rent payments and the labor payments and the Greco and Sons payments came to be, like, I already had a mechanism to get the word out to people as to what we're all about and engage yet humble following of people that were following along and wanting to support when and where they could. So maybe a
Tony,
little
you are ahead of
long-winded,
your
but
game. This is like
Yeah.
what I love is even though, what I'm sharing the strategy behind it, you are putting it into action and ahead of it, because I think what it comes back to is content needs to be relatable. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to resonate with who you're speaking to. And what you are seeing with the live content that you're creating, that absolutely is one of the biggest content trends. And I don't use trends in a flippant way. I think that this is the direction that people are going, and the type of content that they like to see is they like to see the more behind the scenes and actually feel like they're having a conversation with someone. They see like, hey, I feel like I know Professor Pizza. I feel like I know a little bit more about this restaurant, and it makes consumers then want to go and check it out. And I
totally.
think that that's absolutely, and that's also, I think it really parlays nicely into the why for influencers and why restaurants should consider influencers as a part of their approach too, because exactly what you're doing, Tony, this is how influencers can also work with restaurants to have that more one-to-one, almost dialogue with consumers. And we were talking about social SEO. So going a little bit back to the strategy of it, influencers really goes hand in hand with better social SEO too, because when influencers are posting their content and talking about restaurants, they are able to not only boost awareness with their own audiences, and maybe it's an audience that the restaurant hasn't been able to tap into yet, but it's an audience that they know they need to get in front of. Influencers tend to drive higher engagement than than an owned social media channel. And all of that helps to boost those social search rankings within the platform. So, Tony, you might not have realized it, but you are doing exactly the playbook of what we recommend.
Why he's on the podcast, folks. That's why he's on the podcast.
Well, you know who's quick shout out to somebody who's not on the podcast. When you start, you do it all on your own, but as time goes on, you try and build a team of people around you. I would say nearest and dearest to my heart on that team is my cousin Michael Mantis, who he does so much. We still haven't totally arrived on his title, but certainly he does everything for us from a social media standpoint beyond just injecting my own personality, of which I'm still very much involved with. But I like the word that you use, Magooby, conversation.
Mhm.
We've tried to make sure people know from the beginning that when you're talking to the Professor Pizza account or engaging with the Professor Pizza account, unless you're seeing me on a live, in which case you're obviously talking to me, you're probably talking to me or you're engaging with my cousin Michael, who's certainly part of the Professor Pizza universe. And when you have anybody engaging with your platform beyond just yourself, I think it's so important that whoever that is really keyed into how you feel, what you're passionate about, what the business stands for, and quite literally can like cross reference with you to make sure that we're all putting forth the same message, right? And I'm lucky in that he's my cousin and that we can talk daily and just stay keyed in with that conversation that we're trying to have with our following that we have built together. And influencers, as you said, are an extension of that conversation and another way to make it, as it should, feel as organic as possible. Sometimes when it's just coming from the restaurant, it can seem a little bit too close to home to be what's the word I'm looking for? Authentic. It's like obviously I've
Mhm.
got that. Sometimes you just need that third party to engage with people and say, of course they're going to tell you they believe in it. They've given their whole life to this, but as a third party influencer or a third party opinion, I can tell you this is some place I would spend my money at. And obviously, we have those relationships with influencers, but the best influencers are the ones that, even if money weren't attached to it, these are the places that they would find themselves at organically, right? And
Mhm.
I think nowadays the consumer, the watcher, the person that's engaging is got an astute enough perspective to tell the difference between those influencer relationships that are organic and genuine and those that really quite frankly might just be a money grab. And so we don't work with a lot of influencers at Professor Pizza, and that's not for our disdain for them. It's because we so appreciate the effectiveness of the ones that really understand our mission and really understand what we're all about. And so we just lean extra hard into those particular accounts and those particular individuals that really help drive the message forward. So we've been able to do that with Foxito, Best Food Alex, a handful of other ones that have been with us from the very beginning. And a lot of times, like where free food or even a monetary exchange might come to be. Some of these influencers, many of them spent their own money with me, organically before we ever had an arrangement. Some of those people were with me not when I had a 130 seat restaurant in Old Town or a seasonal rooftop in the West Loop, but a pop up out of my former Hermosa apartment where I was slinging pizzas out of said apartment in the middle of the pandemic. So when I had a lot less to show for myself, they were engaging with me in a real way. And those are still, in many cases, the same influencers I find myself working with today.
Mhm.
Something I think that you're both kind of swirling around here that I want to kind of park at real quick, which is this notion of sort of brand versus human in that. And as I've come to understand it, and I experience within our own production at Nation's Restaurant News, which is we might see more engagement from our individual editors than we might see from our brand, Nation's Restaurant News, depending on the platform. And we talk about this a lot because we as an editorial team have really invested in becoming the persona behind the brand, and that is what a lot of people follow versus sort of the faceless entity of the brand. And so what I'm getting at with this, because I think you're both kind of making this point, which is, Tony, for you, people started following you as Professor Pizza before they followed the restaurant, and that was something that paid dividends when you had the restaurant because they had that human connection to you. Megumi, I think you're saying essentially that same thing. And I think this is ultimately why influencers themselves are so big, is they are people first and foremost who have personalities and opinions. So I guess, Megumi, what I'm curious to
Mhm.
hear from you is, if I were to think of those who couldn't do it like Tony, they couldn't build an audience before they opened their restaurant. And here they just have a restaurant, they have a brand, and they still want to accomplish these same things. How do you bridge that divide, or how do you act as a persona, a personality, a human, and not just that faceless entity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, we would say you need to know as a brand, what is your brand personality? And is there a way in which maybe you consider personifying it, or making sure it's very clear that you do have a distinct brand tone, brand voice? And how does that show up on social media? Can it be, so say you are, I think Duolingo is a really great example outside of the restaurant industry. However, they have used their own channel and created such an engaged presence because they have really leaned into their brand being one that it's fun, it's quirky, it's about learning. And they have then had that carry out that persona through their social media channels. So that's on one end of the spectrum. And of course, kind of like a gold standard, I would say, of what that could look like. But I do think it is really important that brands take the time to think about, who are we as a brand and how are we communicating that, and ensuring that then that's consistent with how they are portraying themselves on social media. The next thing then is, if they themselves maybe can't go quite so far as a Professor Pizza, that is where influencers can be really, really impactful. And so can you work with, and you should seek to work with, the right influencers? And Tony, this is exactly speaking to what you were saying of, it's got to be authentic. At the end of the day, if you're going to work with an influencer, the most important part of creating a partnership is making sure that you're working with the right partner. It needs to be authentic. If you can find someone who already is an avid champion for your brand, even before you engage with them, even better, because they already are so excited and they may know a lot more about, again, your brand and their audiences, and you can tap into that. And so it's a really great way then to have that more kind of personalized interaction, and brands then can use that influencer content on their own social media feeds.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Tony, this is sort of random, but I just wanted to ask you, do you consider yourself an influencer?
That's funny. I think by nature of like actively going after followers, and I'm actively going after followers, not for the sake of followers, but because of, the currency behind followers. Uh, you have to consider yourself an influencer. I don't think it's a shame that it's considered somewhat of a four-letter word or a dirty word, but like I think you spend so much time either trying to consider yourself a chef or a cook or a restaurant owner or a business owner or an entrepreneur that like those are the things or the monikers that you spent this much time pursuing, and then all of a sudden you get this other one. It's kind of like a BOGO thing going on. Like you own a restaurant. Well, you're also going to be an influencer. I think the more you embrace it, the more it's going to work in your favor, right? So, I mean, for me, I've kind of embraced it to a ridiculous extent in that, like, I make caricature of my own brand, right? I'm built into my logo. It's my face as a pizza slice. There is a cartoon of myself on the inside of my pizza boxes, on the inside of my menus. I refer to myself in a public setting in many cases, or other people do, as when referring to me as Professor Pizza. So I've leaned into it. Like I've got two children. Each of them have their own mother. I have a lot of responsibilities in life, and whatever edge I can give myself to get the Professor Pizza name out there and get my pizza into the mouths, the stomachs, the households of as many Chicagoans and eventually beyond as possible. Like I'm going to take that opportunity, right? You know, we all experience the joy of being the new kid on the block when you open up a new restaurant. But like for me, the last time I opened up a restaurant was like almost 15 months ago, which in the restaurant world is an eternity, right? So since then, places like Pizza Michi, Zaza's, Bob's Pizza, Fornaroso, Bellucci's, like they're all doing their thing, and those are some of those places are places that have opened for me. Some of those places are places that have opened up since I've opened up. But either way, they're all pizzerias and places that people could go instead of mine. And by the way, I mentioned all those places because they should go to those places. They're fantastic. But I got to give them a reason to come to mine too. And for me, it's an opportunity to reach more people than I could if I just walk down the sidewalk, right? And you can bring those two worlds together. And I have, and I will again. But it's just one of those things, and I think it's like back to my original point, where it's like this is a really cutthroat industry. You know, the margins are paper thin. Most of us will, at best, eke out a living. Plenty of us hope to do better than that. And I think for the vast majority of us, I don't think we found a better tool than social media and engaging with a digital platform to get our names out there. And so, yeah, I got to consider myself an influencer because I'm actively trying to influence people to come and eat my pizza.
And that's why I asked that question actually, because the title influencer, in some ways, maybe a little bit of a misnomer, right? Because if we took a step back and recognize that everybody is media, right? Everybody can be and is media if you have a social media presence. Influencers just happen to be people with larger audience and influence people to make decisions. And so, Tony, in your example, ultimately you're influencing them to come to your restaurant, right? And I guess to follow up on that, Tony, I'm curious what your goal is through your social presence. Is that your goal, just to have more people come to check out your restaurant, or is there a broader purpose to the influence that you have?
You know, I mean, right now, like the call to action is that I have a restaurant. So in this very moment, it's at the top of the hierarchy of things I'm trying to influence them to do, right? But I'm influencing them to keep their mind and their eyes trained towards our Instagram page as we open up our second location in the West Town Noble Square neighborhood. I'm influencing them to stay tuned for the collaborations I have coming up or the brand deals that I mean I literally like pressed accept on a collaboration for a brand deal since we've been on this with Killer Brownie. So we're going to be launching that with a comedy show at the new location, bringing in one of my legitimate loves that has nothing to do with me necessarily. Just I love stand up comedy. I know that the people that I have chosen to produce this show are going to put forth some of the best stand up comics local to our scene here in Chicago. And I'm going to use my authentic relationship with stand up comedy to prop up the pizzeria, prop up the brownie company that has taken their corporate dollars to reinvest into the scene in a local and organic fashion by paying these stand up comedians, by paying me to use my space, by paying me to use my platform, right? So I'm going to influence them to take advantage of what we're doing with the folks at Killer Brownie, to show up to our Gosney Pizza Oven event the day before. I'm going to influence them to buy my merch when my merch comes out. I'm going to influence them to stock their freezers with my frozen pizzas as soon as that launches. You know, some of these things I'm just putting out into the universe, and they're not right around the corner, but the things that I'm working on in the next year or so. So it's whatever I have going on in the moment. You know, the restaurant is like that grounding factor that kind of gives me credential in the space. You know, I can be this online character, but at the end of the day, I do have a physical brick and mortar restaurant where I pay rent and I pay salaries and I pay hourly wages, and that needs your support to stay in motion. So that's always going to be number one on the list, but there's going to be these other things that are there to prop up that core goal. And over time, that core goal might change. Like, I think I'll always have pizzerias, but I really do believe in my heart that like my ambitions are beyond just making pizza for people here in Chicago and having a frozen footprint, so to speak, of the Professor Pizza name that allows people to have a more elevated experience when making a pizza at home for their friends and family or themselves after a night out. So those are all different calls of action, but this is a tool to engage people on all those levels.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And Megumi, I would turn that over to you too, which is to say, again, I think people think of influencer and they think, "Oh, different that's a different kind of person. That's a job title now. That's, somebody
Mhm.
doing something different than what I'm doing." But again, as this conversation is specifically for restaurant operators using content and creating content for their own marketing, they have to see themselves as influencers. And I guess, Megumi, my question then is, for those operators who are listening to this, what should be some of their goals? They're not going to maybe,
Mm.
think of themselves as an influencer necessarily, but they're doing this to some end. So, what is your recommendation for operators as to how they should view leveraging content for
Mhm.
the sake of their brand?
Yeah. Great question. So, first and foremost, I think what is really important for them to know off the bat is that a strong social media presence, and by extension of that, having a strong, maybe influencer program, that has significant business impact. The investment, whether it's time, whether it's monetary, it's well worth it because it will increase visibility and it will drive foot traffic. So I think that's kind of first and foremost. It's really important to have that understanding. And then when you realize, oh, this can be a really important and should be a really important part of our marketing plan and strategy, really looking at, okay, how do we use our social presence as a driver for awareness and for foot traffic? And so taking a step back and first and foremost, we always say, audit what your social presence is. What does your digital footprint look like online? Take a look at the metrics. We think it's so important to measure how activity is going. Are people engaging with your content? What can you learn from whether people are engaging or not? What type of content tends to draw more eyeballs, tends to increase more comments and likes? Have a good understanding of that. Use those insights to then inform what type of content then should we be putting out on our channels. You want to make sure that it is authentic to who you are. So if you've not yet determined these are, maybe these are kind of the core areas of content that we want to be sharing. Maybe for restaurants, it might be a mix of showcasing, culinary excellence and also maybe giving a little bit behind the scenes in the kitchen. It could be speaking to the local community. Those can all be different themes and you have to identify what themes are best for you. Then start to put that into action. And again, keep measuring to see how is that working. The next step too is identify who are potential influencers who can authentically speak on your brand. That third party credibility speaks volumes. And maybe you see some of the same individuals consistently engaging with your social media content. And you find out they have a pretty decent following. We like to say to be an influencer, there is the entire range. And what we see is within the micro space. So those are creators who have between 15,000 to 100,000 followers. They're not the 1 million. They don't have 1 million followers, but micro influencers are really, really important because they have incredibly high engagement rates. And so I think identifying who those individuals are and starting to have collaborative conversations with them and seeing, are there ways to partner together? So those are a few initial things and hopefully some good pieces of advice just to get started.
Yeah, and segueing into our last question, I want to ask both of you just for your advice for any restaurant operator listening to this who might feel intimidated by all of this. Because I'll speak for myself. I started a TikTok a few months ago because it's like, well, I think I have to do this, but it feels intimidating. And
Yeah.
Tony, I've been inspired by you because you're that notion of, well, you don't have to be perfect; you just have to hit record. You know, It feels like a big thing to tackle and almost like I'm already behind the curve, right? So I know restaurant operators are there too, especially smaller and independent restaurant operators who think to themselves, my gosh, I don't have time for this. This all seems like so much. I'm wondering about your advice. Tony, we'll start with you because you've been through this, you've done this, you started this before the restaurant, but here you are as a restaurant operator with this great presence on social media. Anybody else in your shoes, besides building the audience before the restaurant, what is some other advice you would have for them?
Yeah, I mean, like when you invited me to do this podcast today and then sent me the link, you sent like some basic instructions. Put it on a reliable like piece of technology. It works better on the computer. Do it somewhere quiet. Put your headphones in. Like things that are going to set up this podcast for success, right? So when I look at social media, it's an extension of my job, right? So if I was going to go to work, I'd want to make sure that I had my office set up, you know, the way I needed it to be for my ultimate success. And social media is no different. So, like, for the restaurant owner, like, even if your space is not ideal for it, and many of ours are not, and there's so many things about my space, not my space, but my kitchen. My space is dead, guys. Don't create a MySpace.
It's another podcast.
uh, but like my kitchen, like the things I change about it, but I am confident that in everybody's kitchen and in everybody's space, there is that one nook or cranny that they can dig out that's going to be more accessible and more set up for you to record a video than elsewhere, right? So find that space, let the people in the kitchen around you know, hey guys, I am about to record. I'm not focused on you guys, but you might be in the background. You know, if you're not comfortable with that, now's the time to move, or maybe I'm gonna move, you know, quite frankly. Let people know, you know, we're a big fan of kitchen music, but like maybe turn the kitchen music down a little bit and just like set the stage for the fact that you are about to record. It doesn't have to be perfect again, but you want to make sure that you're as comfortable as you possibly can before you record the video. If I'm going to be making a recipe, like I try and get all my mise en place, all my ingredients together in the frame of the camera, start to do a couple tests before I actually go for it because and inevitably I forget something and like I have to leave the camera frame and like go find it and measure it out and whatever, and that's fine. Again, that's fine, but like anything that you can do to better set yourself up before you press record is going to make you feel more comfortable once you do press record. If you have somebody that's willing to help you record and actually act as the cameraman, hold your cell phone, whatever the case may be, while you're doing it, that's going to help you. We don't always have the luxury of that. I don't always have the luxury of that. That's where, like, a small but meaningful investment in some equipment can go a long way. So, if you're saying, okay, I want to invest in this to make this a little bit easier for myself and to increase the production value even slightly. There's so many things, so many targeted ads, especially once you start looking for gizmos and gadgets to help you out. Any of them is better than nothing. But I think at the end of the day, there are two things that many content creators, influencers, cooks could benefit from having, and that is a good set of microphones. I say set because you're immediately going to want two as opposed to one, especially, you know, if you're engaging with somebody else, whether that's a customer, another cook, um, something like this podcast worthy, which a lot of us are starting to consider for our overall social media efforts and something that I am working on myself. So two microphones and a gimbal and recognizing that your phone in many cases is the most powerful camera that you're going to be able to buy on an entry level anyways. It's something you probably already have in your pocket. So I don't make any money from any of these companies, but I did buy some DJI equipment. I bought a set of microphones from them. I bought a gimbal from them, and that setup like ran me like $400, which I recognize is not like no money, But as somebody who has no money, it was still like in the realm of affordability and possibility for me. So even just having those items has empowered me a lot to do it, because so many times you're like, oh man, I don't have anything in this area to set my phone up against. There's no one there to help me. This takes away some of that. And granted, like, I am no pro when it comes to using them, but they kind of recognize that and have built these products to be as intuitive as possible. And the DJI stuff is kind of like at that, balance or tightrope of approachable, but also the more you dig into it, the more you can get out of it from a functionality standpoint. So I have noticed, I imagine there are other brands out there that you'd have similar luck with, but that's ultimately, what I pulled the trigger on. And it has made the whole process that much more approachable. And the quality of the content that I put out has gone up, not like dramatically, but noticeably. So I think just setting yourself up for success before you press record is going to make you feel more comfortable in those moments.
Gumi, I'll let you have that final word on that.
Well, and what
I love
I love what Tony was saying about, really removing that pressure of trying to attain perfection. Social media is not about perfection. It's okay to show some of the imperfection. That tends to be the content, again, because it gives people a really authentic look into who you are. So that's number one. And then also, this is simple, but take a crawl, walk, run approach. You don't need to go all in and all of a sudden be posting every single day. Start with posting maybe once a week on Instagram, once a week on TikTok. And then as you start to feel more comfortable with it, then you can increase the amount of time you're spending on those platforms. You don't need to go all in with a huge influencer program. Start with a pilot campaign. Maybe work with a couple of creators who are already organic, natural fans of the brand, and then try a partnership with them. Measure, see how it goes, and then consider how you might be able to expand on that. The last thing I'll say is there are so many resources available. So Nation's Restaurant News does a killer job of posting a lot of great content with tips. And I also have to give a shameless plug to the Bell blog. So take a look at our blog as well. We have a lot of content and tips specific to the restaurant industry and how you can increase visibility on social media, how you can get started in partnering with influencers.
Megumi Robinson and Tony Scardino, guys, thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.